Here's something that we learned from King David. King David, as many of you know, was the author of a great number of the Psalms that we have in the book of Psalms in the Old Testament. Many of his Psalms are a deep reflection of his current circumstances. And we often think that praise is just something that should be reserved for those moments when we are feeling really up and really excited, when we can say, God, thank you, thank you, thank you. But in David, we get something that's completely different. We get David living out his life, and whether it's going well, or whether he has sinned horribly, or whether he is in trouble and he is afraid, he turns it into a song. It's what he does. And no greater example of that, I shouldn't say that, a great example of that is Psalm 56. Psalm 56 is the text we're using today because this is Kay, one of our parishioners, it's her favorite passage of Scripture, and in particular one verse, Psalm 56, verse 3, where it simply says, "When I am afraid, I will put my trust in you." Not will, I put my trust in you. When I am afraid, I put my trust in you. This is what David writes. Now, here's the great thing about a psalm like this. It gives us the context. It makes sure that we understand that this isn't just out of the blue. This is a context. And there is an introduction to this particular psalm that is very clear. So much so that in the Hebrew scriptures, what we call a prescript or a script before, sort of an introduction script before verse 1, is actually their verse 1, and so on down the line. But in this particular case, we will look at it as something that is really important. Here's what it says in this psalm. It says, this psalm of a moment in time when David was afraid and when he was being pursued by his enemies, this psalm isn't just a poem of lament that you're just supposed to read when you're not feeling very good. It is supposed to be it's supposed to be sung. It says it clearly, Psalm 56, as it begins, for the director of music. And not only that, it's one of those rare psalms where he actually tells us what the tune is as well. Now, this is not incredibly helpful because there is no way for us to know 3,000 years from when David wrote this till today. There is absolutely no record. There was no way of writing down music in those days. So we have no idea what the tune was, but we know the name of it. It was a tune called "A Dove on Distant Oaks." And maybe that was familiar to many people at that time. Maybe it was a tune that we all, that they all understood and knew. And then they could say, okay, here's a psalm that David wrote, and we know the tune, and we can kind of sing it in our heads. So for the director of music, to the tune of "A Dove on Distant Oaks." And there is a sense in that name that a dove is a bird that's usually kept close to home, represents peace. And he says that dove is very far away. It's sitting in trees, those distant oaks that are so far away. You do yourself a favor. Go to YouTube and type in "A Dove on Distant Oaks." You will find a number of artists who have written and prepared songs using this name. And some of them use Psalm 56 as the text for their songs. And some of them do something completely different. But the name of the tunes or the name of the songs is "A Dove on Distant Oaks." Just do that. I don't know if you'll like them or not. I have no idea if any of them are your musical taste. We know that this is from David because it simply says "of David." It also says that it is a miktam. And a miktam is, we're not exactly sure what that is. It is a literary or a musical term. And we don't have enough information about that particular word to know. But it does also say this. It is when the Philistines had seized him in Gath. When the Philistines had seized him in Gath. Well, if you go to 1 Samuel 21, there is a story of when David was in Gath and he was under the influence of the king of Gath, which is down in near where the Philistines were, in that same area. It says that in 1 Samuel 21 that David was fleeing at this time from Saul. So he is fleeing. He's not king yet. He's been anointed king. This is after he had defeated Goliath. And he has now got he's got a bunch of people that have been following him and are part of his band of strong warriors. And but Saul wants to kill him. Saul is threatened by David, and he wants to kill him. So David is not only fleeing from his countrymen, from his own king, but he is also in enemy territory. The Philistines were enemies of the Israelite people at that time. You know some of the great stories of the Philistines. And he gets there, and the king of Asia says, "Isn't this David, the king of the land? Isn't he the one that they sing about in their dances?" And here's what the king of Asia says about David: Saul has slain his thousands, and David has tens of thousands. He has slain tens of thousands. And David says that David took these words to heart and was very much afraid of Achish, king of Gath. It says that he pretended to be insane. And he began to drool. He acted like a madman. He made marks on the door of the gate. And the king looks at him and says, "What's this guy doing here? He's insane. Why bring him to me?" And then one of his great statements in scripture, I just get such a kick out of these. I really do. They just get me. Well, there's so much because the king of Achish, I can't say that, says, "Am I so short of madmen that you have to bring this fellow on to carry on like this in front of me? Must this man come into my house?" In other words, haven't I got enough madmen? I don't know if there was a lot of madmen in those days. Anyways, David, that's the context. He was running from Saul, and he was at a place where he was under the influence of a powerful king. And that's the one place in Scripture where it says that David was afraid. This is where the psalm comes from. And in the psalm, he tells God his troubles. Can I tell you my troubles, God? We don't always feel comfortable telling God our troubles. We think we need to have our act together before we can talk to God. And we can say, "God, here, I'm in trouble, save me." But do we tell God how we really feel? And here in this psalm, David tells God exactly how he feels. Every moment that he's feeling. And he's in deep trouble. And this is in the form of a lament. In other words, he's lamenting how bad things are. The first few verses. "Be merciful to me, O God, for my enemies are in hot pursuit. All day long they press their attack. My adversaries pursue me all day long. In their pride, many are attacking me." So he's going from Saul attacking him, his own countrymen. He's talking about these Philistines, how they're attacking him. Everywhere I go, the enemies are there. And then, even though he's in deep trouble, and though he's lamenting to God, he's just being very honest. And can we stop here for a second? Can I just simply say, stop pretending with God? Would you? Just tell him what's going on. If you're afraid, if you're worried, if you're anxious, tell him. Tell him. And like David, this turns into a song of worship. "Be merciful to me, O God. My enemies are in hot pursuit. All day long they press their attack. They pursue me all day long." Imagine how weary he was. Then in verse 3, there's these key verses that we find in verse 3 and 4, where we find the truth. Even though he's afraid, even though he's being pursued on all sides, he says, "When I am afraid, I put my trust in you. In God, whose word I praise. In God I trust, and am not afraid. Because what can mere mortals do to me?" And here we have this amazing moment of perspective. What can mere mortals do to us? You know, the people that seem to have all the power and authority over us, what can they do to you? And I know this may sound like it, I don't want you to feel that I'm saying no. It's okay to be afraid, but ultimately, anybody who's ever faced persecution, the ones that have risen above the persecution, have always said the same thing. These are just humans. These are mere men. God's on my side. God's on my side. Who can be against me? What can mere mortals do to me? Well, those verses, hang on to those verses 3 and 4. In God I trust, and I'm not afraid. What can mere mortals do to me? He goes on to talk about some more difficulty he's having. He gets back into the lamenting part of the psalm. All day long they twist my words, and all their schemes are for my ruin. They conspire and they lurk and they watch over my steps, hoping to take my life. Because of their wickedness, God, do not let them escape. In your anger, God, bring the nations down. Record my misery. List my tears on your scroll. And there's some confusion about the actual word there. Some say, put all my tears into a wineskin. In other words, save them so you can see how many there are. Are they not in your record? Then the enemies will turn back when I call for help. But by this I will know that God is for me. He goes back into the lament. They're after me, but I'm going to turn this to praise. You go back to verse 3. When I'm afraid, I'm simply going to put my trust in you. I'm going to acknowledge that God, you're in control and that I do not have to be afraid. And he finishes with these great words, verses 10, 11, 12, and 13, the last 4 verses, where he says, in God whose word I praise, in the Lord whose word I praise, in the Lord I trust and am not afraid. What can man do to me? I am under vows to you, my God. I will present my thank offerings to you, for you have delivered me from death and my feet from stumbling, that I may walk before God in the light of life. And he says, even though I'm going through a difficult time right now, I know that I'm going to sing a song of deliverance. And that's why and how David can take a moment when he is really afraid and he can turn it into a song of praise to the tune of a dove on distant oaks. He just makes this great conclusion. In God I will trust and I will not be afraid. And we get there when we are honest with God about how we feel. Kay helped me out a lot in this sermon when she said, someone wrote this once and I wrote it down and I want to give it to you. And she said, this is what she has underneath this verse on her fridge, which is simply this, and just listen carefully. When I am afraid, I will trust in you. When I am anxious, I will trust in you. When I am angry, I will trust in you. When I am lonely, I will trust in you. When I am misunderstood, I will trust in you. When I am shunned, I will trust in you. When I am slandered, I will trust in you. These are all the things that were happening to David. He was afraid. He was anxious. He was a bit angry at some of the things that were happening to him. And certainly he was lonely, felt all alone. Everybody seemed to be against him, misunderstood and shunned and slandered. He understood all that. And David says, I will put my trust in you. I wonder sometimes if we truly acknowledge the fear that we have. As a child, I remember being afraid only a few times in my life. I remember being afraid when my dad was not home because I felt so much comfort and so protected when he was home. Not that my mom didn't do a great job, she did, but I always felt less not afraid at all when my dad was there. I remember that. I also know that there were times, it was so drilled into us at my age, when I grew up in the 60s, born in 1959, you can figure out how old I am. I grew up in the 60s, but we grew up with this great fear that the Soviets were going to drop nuclear bombs on us. I remember laying down in bed one night and I heard a plane flying way off in the distance. And I thought to myself, is that them coming to bomb us? And I know there's great fear. I feared when my children came into this world. What kind of world are my children going to face? Now I feel the same thing for my grandchildren. What kind of world are my grandchildren going to face? What's happening? And there can be great cause for fear. Just think of what we've been through in the last 3 years. It was an unbelievable element of fear that rose up in all kinds of people. And I'm not going to go into great discussions about where the fear came from. I think you understand where it comes from. And like David, we can take those unbelievable circumstances and we can take them and we can turn them into a psalm of praise, and the song of praise. We can make up the tune, A Dove on Distant Oaks, and we can put these words to it or put our own words to it. God, I'm afraid, but it's okay that I'm afraid, because when I am afraid, I just need to put my trust in you. And that is a great hymn of praise. Imagine this, your life, being honest with God, being a great hymn of praise. I hope you're encouraged by these words. I know I have been encouraged by these words. I've been thinking all this week about all the things that I'm afraid of, and I have been taking this verse to heart and simply saying, in this area where I'm afraid, God, I'm going to put my trust in you. I'm going to sing about it, just like David did. May you find the courage to sing psalms and songs of praise, no matter what you are facing, even when you are afraid. Thanks for being here this week. May God bless you. And until next time, go in God's peace.